Okay, Dacian, I think we're
Okay. So
so we can start.
okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this workshop on sustainability in public procurement. We're gonna talk about sustainability from different perspectives. This workshop is organized under the SAPIENS network program, which brings together 15 PhD students and their supervisors and a lot of institutions that are supporting the project to talk about sustainability in public procurement from different perspectives, from human rights to circular economy to sustainability in construction, in textiles industry, in technology, information and IT. So this is the project. You can access the project website and learn more about the PhDs and their topics. Now we have 4 of the PhDs. We call them early research, early stage researchers, because they are Marie Curie scholars, and we're going to have a discussion about sustainability from the perspective of their topics. And of course, we are 3 moderators here. My colleague Roxana Vornicu and Sebastien Lizin from University of Hasselt. I will start by presenting the moderators. So first, I am Dacian Dragos from Babeș-Bolyai University. I'm teaching administrative law and public procurement. Roxana Vornicu, she's a lecturer at the King's College in London and a lawyer in Bucharest Bar, one of the few specialized procurement lawyers from an international perspective with the expertise in international law.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Sebastien Lizin, who's a professor of economics at the Hasselt University, and he's one of the supervisors of Haitham, one of the ESRs that will present today. Okay, and let's move on to the actual stars of this workshop, the 4 ESRs. We're going to start with Felippe Vilaça from Brazil, but studying in Europe for a while. He's based at Gävle University in Sweden, and his topic is on collaboration between different actors in procurement process. So delivering sustainable procurement through collaboration. Then we have Nadia Sava. She's based in Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, and she is writing her thesis on Industry 4.0 and procurement, so procurement of technology and using technology. Then we have Alexandru Buftic, also based at Babeș-Bolyai University. He's focusing on sustainability in procurement, in construction, so in infrastructure. And Haitham Ghaida, University of Hasselt, who deals with life cycle costing in infrastructure, in contracts, and consequently also with sustainability in public contracts. Our engineer in the group. So welcome everybody. We have participants from our universities, but also from the practice of public procurement. We hope that this discussion will be a good opportunity to exchange ideas and to see whether the sustainability in public procurement is something that is worth pursuing in the next years, and what are the ideas that are coming out of this research that is done under the SAPIENS network. So I will invite first Felippe to start with the presentation on his topic. Then the others, and at the end we're going to have discussions and questions and follow-up. Okay.
Great.
Please.
Thank you, Dacian, for the introduction, and hello everybody. Happy to be here, not only with my colleagues and other researchers, but also with the audience. It's always a pleasure to be here with you discussing such an interesting topic as sustainable public procurement. And I'd like to start this presentation. Let me just share here a PowerPoint. Maybe, can you see it?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. I'm not seeing your faces now, but I'll certainly try to do my best in presenting a holistic approach, let's say a systemic approach to sustainable public procurement in a way that we can introduce the topic and make some alignments here on concepts that can be useful for the further discussions on this webinar, I imagine. So, and then my name is Felippe Vilaça. I'm a PhD scholar at the University of Gävle in Sweden, and I'm a Hikuhi Fellow at the SAPIENS network. And this following minutes, I'll be presenting this systemic approach based on a paper which I had the pleasure to publish with two brilliant researchers, Rodrigo Lozano and Maria Barreiro-Yen. This paper called it Developing a Harmonic Sustainable Public Procurement Framework, which was, by the way, one of the winners of a prize from the Publications Office of the European Union on public procurement research. And this is interesting because we had the chance in that paper to discuss sustainability and sustainable public procurement from the start. We were trying to understand the first steps of my research topic, which is collaboration between stakeholders in sustainable public procurement, but we started giving, let's say, a step back and let's try to understand the whole procurement system and see how sustainability fits in it. Because sustainability is a really, really important concept, as we all know here. And sustainability, let's just retake the concept here, is aimed at meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And we are talking about sustainability. We're talking about several dimensions of sustainability. We know the economic dimension, environmental dimension, the social dimension, and also the time dimension, which is responsible for understanding the interconnection between the three first dimensions over time, looking ahead and looking to the past, the present, etc. So we understand sustainability is a very important concept and idea. We understand sustainable development as joining efforts towards sustainable societies, etc. But the important thing is that when we are working with sustainability issues, we need to follow holistic approaches, which means understand the part and the whole, and the interconnections between the parts and how they can influence the whole, etc. We are bringing a systemic approach, and we also trying to use transdisciplinary approaches, trying to bring knowledge from different disciplines, and from disciplines and practitioners, trying to build new understandings, etc. So sustainability is already quite complex context and concept to be applied. And when we add sustainability into the public procurement world, then we have something kind of different from what we had before, because then we have sustainable public procurement. And we know that sustainable public procurement is an interesting initiative, trying to use the government's purchasing power to foster sustainable consumption and production, basically linking huge public buyers to suppliers, using, let's say, a sustainability-friendly link in terms of trying to develop more sustainable business models and make such impact on the market itself. So we understand this as really interesting. But the point is, when we add sustainability into the already complex world of public procurement, then we have something else. And in this research, we are trying to understand this, and especially understand the different concepts and dimensions that the system of sustainable public procurement presents to us. Why? Because analyzing the discourses and some efforts in implementing sustainable public procurement, we have found that there are at least 4 specific elements in which these researchers or even practitioners usually to focus on, which are, we'll present them briefly, demand offering, specifications, stakeholder interactions, and disciplinary approaches. But the point is that usually these elements are understood or applied separately. And then we were trying here to develop a holistic approach to harmonize these elements. That was the idea, trying to build a framework for a better understanding of sustainable public procurement, what happens when we add sustainability into that complex world. And the idea was to integrate the perspective and understand it as a whole. So let me present these elements as we understood in that paper. They can eventually help us to better understand or even apply some initiatives in sustainable public procurement. The first one is the demand offering, because one of the main elements of sustainable public procurement is that we know that a public buyer will be demanding something and a supplier will be offering something, a product or a service, etc. Maybe some lawyers can call it subject matter of the contract or something like that. But the point is, you have someone buying and someone offering, and these subject matter, this should be sustainable in a sustainable way, or developed with sustainability thinking on that. And the point is, there are different categories which were found in the literature, and it's important to understand them, because contracting authority can demand a sustainable product. For example, let's say I want to change the lamps from a public school and just buy more efficient, sustainable lamps, for example. That's okay. You can add sustainability while buying a product. But not only that, you can also add sustainability when buying a service, when you are demanding and someone is offering a service, which includes products. For example, okay, I want to change the lamps from my school, but I want a supplier to come here with their workforce using, for example, reserving some workers from disadvantaged groups, for example. They should be here changing the lamps. I'm using then a social approach to this service, which also contains the more efficient lamp, etc. I mean, we can have also services that are buying in a sustainable way, but not only that, we may also have functions. There are demand offering of functions, which is different from the services and products that are based on descriptive requirements. You exactly say which kind of lamp do you want to have. Here in functional procurement, we are describing the functions, the solutions. You are also measuring the results of the procurement, which is kind of, I don't care which kind of brand of lamp you are using. I'm just care about with the amount of lumens which I will measure with my measurement device here. So I'm measuring if my school is well developed in terms of lighting. And then you can add sustainability issues on that too, eventually on discarding the products also. You can measure the results of the procurement, so you have a different kind of procurement happening here. But we have also a different one called needs fulfillment. You can have a demand offering of needs in terms of contracting authority can buy needs fulfillment, which supplier will offer that. For example, I don't care about which kind of technology or solution you are going to use here in my school. I just want you to follow the functional requirements that have a service. It has a product, but we don't need to specify that because I'm giving freedom to the supplier to develop their own solutions along the contract execution, which means that there are different ways of buying, different things to buy. And this can be, and should be addressed when we are trying to understand and to implement sustainable public procurement initiatives. And we have another element called the specifications, which are also basically found in each procurement process. That means that services or products, etc., we are trying to buy in this procurement process, they need to be specified in some way. And the literature have different kinds of specifications. We have at least 3. Technical specifications related to the material substance of the products and services, etc. Let's say with the kind of the lamp that we bought, for example. But we also have non-technical specifications. For example, when we are buying food for schools, maybe we can have a technical specification saying that we need some fresh food, organic food. But in the non-technical specifications, a contracting authority can demand that the delivery of food should be done with short roads, with less CO2 emissions, with less packaging. We are talking about how the services or products will be provided. So we have different kind of specifications. And we also have socio-cultural specifications, which states how the interactions between the stakeholders will happen during the contract execution. We have contract authorities demanding that, for example, the farms that are selling sustainable food, the cooperatives, they need to go once or twice a year into the schools to teach children how to grow, to raise crops at home, etc. I mean, you can have, and there are experiences on that, different types of specifications with which you can add sustainability into a procurement process. But there is another important element, which is called stakeholder interactions. Because to make those specifications work well, and that demand and offering also connects well, it's usually needed to have stakeholder interactions, because in, let's say, a traditional public procurement, a contracting authority just demands and the supplier just offers something. You have a delivery of the product and you pay for the product, and that's it. You don't have that much interactions usually, but you can have. And in sustainability, you kind of need to have, because you need to discuss how can you share the ownership of the solutions, how can we share the results of this sustainability project, which is the procurement process as well. So how can we develop better specifications, better solutions? How can we share the contract monitoring with the citizens? There are several ways of improving a procurement process through stakeholder interactions, especially through collaboration between stakeholders. So this is a very important element also in the sustainable public procurement system, because it changes the way that we do procurement, and adds also complexity to this system. And the last element that we found in the literature are different disciplinary approaches that are supporting initiatives or giving us understanding of how sustainable public procurement works. Because we have found at least 9 different disciplinary approaches. We have, for example, the technical approach, which is using category management expertise, using, for example, nutrition or construction expertise to try to build better specifications, sustainability criteria, studying life cycle costs, etc. You have technical knowledge being used from each different procurement type to make better specifications, better demand offering, and using stakeholder interactions to make a better sustainable public procurement. But there is also a public procurement approach based on how can we link sustainable public procurement with the sustainability policies within the country, for example, and how can we make the citizens' wishes being represented into the sustainable public procurement initiatives. We also have the legal approach, very important, responsible for supporting the new regulations and more clear regulations, and even interpreting the actual regulations to support the initiatives on sustainable procurement. We have an economic approach, much focused on costs, benefits, and trade-offs in sustainable procurement processes. We have the management approach based on leadership, change management, strategic guidance. So looking to the organization and how can we manage its resources and systems. The marketing approach, which is looking for the behavior of the consumers in the markets, because when a big buyer such as government start buying products which are sustainable, etc., sometimes you can even have a shortage of sustainable products because the buyer and the supplier did not have an alignment with the other consumers, for example. So there must be, according to some research, there must be a balancing with these two. We have the behavioral approach, looking to the behavior of the practitioners on how a sustainability commitment can influence the undertaking of sustainable public procurement. We have also the societal approach, based on concepts such as disadvantaged groups, gender equality, and how can the whole sustainable public procurement system be implemented by looking primarily to these concepts and ideas which are so important for the whole society, not only for the social dimension of sustainability, but for the whole sustainability process. And in the end, we have the institutional approach, which is based on the institutional guidance from international organizations, etc. They are building guidelines and giving resources that have been supporting the implementation of sustainable public procurement. The point is there are several disciplinary approaches. We still don't know how they are eventually, if they are interconnected or not, but there are several disciplinary approaches contributing to the implementation of sustainable public procurement, contributing to the design of specifications, to the stakeholder interactions, to the demand offering. So these also should be acknowledged when we are looking to the sustainable public procurement system. And departing from those elements, we're trying to join them together and say, okay, now we kind of understand what can be a relevant sustainable public procurement system. When you're talking about sustainable public procurement, when you're analyzing a sustainable public procurement initiative, or even practitioners when they are implementing some kind of sustainable procurement process, they can eventually look to the system and say, what am I using from this system? Am I missing something here? Because the most important points are the sustainability dimensions, the disciplinary approaches, the interactions between stakeholders, the technical specifications, and the demand offering. And I'm sure that in the following presentations, my colleagues will make soon, we can probably take from their presentation some kind of mix between these, because when you're talking about sustainable construction, for example, we are probably talking about functional procurement, services procurement, with technical and non-technical specifications, in which the industry organizations, buyers, and other stakeholders are joining efforts to build, to design the procurement in a better way, using technical approaches, legal approaches, etc. So we can probably try to understand how these elements are interconnected, looking towards implementing sustainability and the whole sustainability dimensions into public procurement. So this is what we were offering by this researcher and this paper, which is the idea that the framework is based on interrelations between those elements, trying to capture the full complexity of sustainable public procurement. And we are transmitting the message that the harmonization of those elements is very important to implement sustainable public procurement. And also, we made an analogy, because when a composer is trying to build a song, for example, usually composers are using notes and chords to bring harmonies, to bring a symphony from to life, and then a composer usually knows and how to mix those elements together. And in case of the sustainable public procurement system, it's kind of the same. When we are implementing or trying to analyze it, we should look to those elements and the interconnections and trying to build this beautiful symphony that we call sustainable public procurement. In this case, the idea is to make societies more and more sustainable a long time. And I hope to have contributed to the topic by bringing this introduction as a holistic approach, a systemic approach, and how can we better understand sustainable public procurement as a whole. And thank you so much for having me here, guys.
Thank you, Felippe. The audience would like to have the questions and the comments at the end after the 4 presentations. So please write down your questions and let's discuss them in the end. Now I'm gonna have Nadia. She's gonna talk about procurement of IT and also other aspects of 4.0 industry. Please, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Dacian, for the introduction. I will now share my screen and let me know if it's visible for you.
Yes, now it's visible.
Okay, great. Great. So just like my colleagues, I'm a Marie Curie Fellow in the SAPIENS network. I'm affiliated with Babeș-Bolyai University in Romania, where I'm a PhD student and research assistant. And my research in general focuses on the use of digital technologies for a more sustainable public procurement. Today, the aim of my presentation is to give a brief overview of what is sustainable public procurement data monitoring, what its use, and legal framework. And this presentation is partly based on an article that I published called the E-Forms Regulation and Sustainable Public Procurement Data Collection that you will find referenced at the end of my presentation. My presentation is structured into 3 parts. First, we will discuss about some key concepts and explain how data can lead to a more sustainable public procurement. Then I will present the main EU legal framework. And finally, I will highlight some limitations of the current legal framework and discuss potential solutions. So let's start with some key concepts. What is public procurement data? Public procurement data can refer to any element from the procurement cycle. For example, the contracting authority, the economic operator, or the procedure that was used, and so on. What about sustainable public procurement and data? This can refer to any information on the use of green or social aspects in the public procurement process. So, for example, it can mean the use of green technical specifications. What are the benefits of data for sustainable public procurement? Both academics and policymakers agree that data can be used to monitor green and social criteria by each contracting authority to compare their performance and to then adapt policy decisions so as to increase sustainability. The European Commission, in its communication on the new public procurement data space, states that data can contribute to sustainability in public procurement with the following, and I quote, benchmarking, knowledge sharing, fighting corruption, and easier reporting on innovative green and social procurement. However, the data that we currently have is not able to achieve these goals. The European Commission describes the current state of public procurement data, and I quote, public procurement is rich in data, but poor in making it work for taxpayers, policymakers, and public buyers. In this quote, the European Commission acknowledges 2 aspects. First, data monitoring holds a lot of potential for many stakeholders, And second, the current state of public procurement data leaves much to be desired. We know that data above the EU thresholds is currently collected in TED, Tenders Electronic Daily, at EU level. However, the literature has shown that this data has many quality issues that limit its usage. According to the same communication from the European Commission, the data that we currently have is equal to only 20% of all public procurement data that we have in general. So not only do we not have enough data, but the data that we have is flawed. So let's move to the second part of my presentation, where I will look into the current EU legal framework concerning sustainable public procurement data monitoring. First of all, where can you find data? We can find data at national level in various national infrastructures. We can find data at EU level in the Tenders Electronic Daily, and in the future, we will be able to find data in the new public procurement data space. When it comes to the legal framework, I listed here the main relevant legal resources, which are the Public Procurement Directive, the e-Forms Regulation, the Open Data Directive, and the Data Governance Act. Let's first take a look at the e-Forms Regulation. The e-Forms Regulation created a standard that explains how member states should collect public procurement data. It is a very useful standard because it's the first one that includes sustainability and sustainable aspects in the public procurement data collection. And here in the image, the graph is from the annex to the regulation. We can see some of the fields related to sustainable public procurement. For example, green procurement, social procurement, accessibility, clean vehicles directive, and so on. However, on the right side of the screen, we can see O, the symbol O for all of these fields, which means that their collection is optional. Filling in these fields is optional, meaning that member states can decide whether to collect this data or not. There is no legal obligation to collect data on these aspects, and this option is left for the member states to decide. Therefore, the e-Forms is indeed a promising step. Why? Because it created this standard for sustainable public procurement data collection, but on the other hand, it's limited by the fact that all of the fields are optional. There is no legal basis for mandatory data collection, and member states might decide to simply not collect this data. The public procurement data space is another innovation in this area. This will be a new 4-layered structure that will collect public procurement data. And we can see here in this graph, and it comes from the communication from the Commission on the new public procurement data space, it's 4 layers. This will collect data, then it will further clean the data so it can be used for different analysis by various stakeholders with different rights. It could collect data both below and above thresholds, as well as data on sustainability. While this new public procurement data space holds a multitude of potential benefits, including for sustainability, it is limited by the same aspects that were discussed prior. The fact that member states can simply decide to not collect data on sustainability and to not share this data. So what are the main limitations and what are the possible solutions? Let's see the main takeaways and some ideas. We saw that there is a considerable potential for data to foster sustainability. We also saw that there is a new standard for data collection, which is the e-Forms Regulation, which includes sustainability aspects, and a future new infrastructure to collect this data, which is the new public procurement data space. Therefore, we can ask ourselves, are we there yet? Do we benefit from all the data, from all that the data has to offer? We took the first steps, but there is still a long way ahead, that of actually using the e-Forms and implementing the public procurement data space. So what is overlooked? What are the main limitations? As I highlighted in my presentation, the first one is the fact that there is no legal basis to collect sustainable public procurement data. We have a standard, yes, but all of the sustainability fields are optional. Therefore, member states can decide to not collect this data. And secondly, the current approach is a top-down approach that looks very much at the EU level and overlooks the role of each and every contracting authority. So what can a contracting authority do at micro level? Ideally, each contracting authority would learn how to collect data, would learn how to use its own data at micro level. For example, it could use Power BI, which is a common data visualization tool that is already used by many contracting authorities, both in the EU and outside the EU. And using this, it can feed into its data, and the responsible team with contract award could use this data in their day-to-day activities in order to make better decisions. This way, a contracting authority can learn directly how to use data and why data is useful. Then, further sharing data at national and EU level would come as a natural continuation of its daily activities. And a successful example is the work done by the Open Contracting Partnership and the Lithuanian government that created a live dashboard with public procurement data, including green public procurement. The key takeaway is the following. The only way for the EU top-down approach to be successful is through an equally significant bottom-up approach that starts with the daily work of each and every contracting authority. If you're interested to learn more, I added here some further readings, my article that I mentioned in the beginning, and also other works, and I hope my presentation sparked your interest into the great potential that data holds for public procurement digitalization and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Again, all the comments and questions at the end. Now I invite Alexandru Buftic, who's going to talk about procurement in construction.
Just a second, I have no idea if it works.
Can you hear me? Presentation, yeah, now we can see you too. Okay.
Okay, very nice. Just a second. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandru Buftic. And today I would like to start with my presentation of one of the puzzles which I have. I'm looking to analyze a European strategy for energy efficiency and the recast of the new directive from 2023, and how European Union is trying to bring sustainability aspects into public procurement through sectorial legislation. And in today's presentation, basically, I would like to present some background and context, some key provisions of the directive, and some challenges related of these provisions when we try to apply them into practice. But let's start with the beginning. Why we need to look at energy efficiency. First of all, we have many industries which consume energy, and energy is the driver of our modern lifestyle. But this energy to produce, we are burning fossil fuels, which brings a lot of environmental damage and increase CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. As we can see here on the graphs, we have the building sector basically leading this quest, with 35% of total energy going to the construction of and using of our infrastructure and buildings. And we have some challenges related to the future. Until 2050, we expect to have 10 billion of people, basically requiring almost 60% of current infrastructure just to keep up with this growth. Moreover, we have a trend which we can see on the graph below. we tend to live in bigger spaces, and these spaces require more appliances and more energy for heating and cooling, also posing a big threat to our environment. And third, specific to Europe, in Europe, we have buildings and infrastructure that are very old, built in 1960s, 1970s, which are not very performant and requires renovation and replacement. Therefore, energy efficiency is not just important, but it is a must. Why so? Let's imagine that we can not give up our lifestyle, but improve. And this is the power of energy efficiency. Basically, energy efficiency, it's called the first fuel because it's cheap, it's clean, and it's most readily available. And there are a few arguments in this sense. First of all, is the most cost-effective method, especially when we are looking to improve energy efficiency of our appliances or to improve the isolation of our buildings. Usually this costs less than building a new power plant. Further one, it's good for the environment. Once we reduce our energy use, we can reduce the impact on our environment, and in this way, trying to protect our social, environmental systems. Also, from economic perspective, this energy efficiency creates a lot of jobs and stimulates economic growth. But what is important is it brings savings and free up money for small businesses and households to use them with other purposes. Moreover, from a social perspective, it makes the energy available for everyone, especially for low-income households, and also brings quite a better environment for people to live. And finally, it's good for our resilience and climate adaptation, especially when we try to reduce our energy use and stress on the grid, and in this way, basically allowing us to get prepared for different climate challenges, such as extreme weather events. But to better understand the new provisions, I would like to tell a few words about the past. We addressing energy efficiency because we're hit by different crises. The first time energy efficiency and in general resource consumption and being more efficient in our resource was in 1950s with the first communities at EU level. But we didn't address this issue until the big oil embargo happened in 1950s, when European Union decided to actually create a more comprehensive energy strategy. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we have development of specific legislation and which try to improve certain aspects, be these materials or different components. In 2000, we have a more comprehensive approach towards energy efficiency. We have a first legislation such as Energy Performance of a Building Directive or the Eco-Design Directive, which tries to improve the performance of the assets as total or set minimum energy efficiency standards for products we use. From 2012, we have an introduction of the first energy efficiency directive, which basically set the first binding measures to reach 20% energy savings by 2020. And we have the introduction of so-called action plans for energy efficiency. And this brings us to 2020, when we have introduction of European Green Deal, which aims to achieve climate neutrality of Europe until 2050. And in these settings, basically, this strategy means that we have to take action, and we have so-called climate neutral or net zero emission scenarios. These are basically plans with different measures for different industries which we have to undertake in order to achieve this goal. Basically, when we are looking at these scenarios, these are plans with different standards. For a construction industry, we have few mandatory standards what we have to use. One of those is called nearly zero energy buildings. Basically, this is a standard which promotes energy efficiency, energy conservation, and the use of renewable sources. This standard will be replaced by another one called Zero Energy Buildings from 2028. Basically, we can see how it progresses until 2050. In these scenarios, public authorities do have a specific role, and a very important one, mainly because it's a very important player in the field. It's a great economic power. As we all know, it spends on the goods, services, and works around 14% of total GDP. And this is basically linked to almost 15% of global CO2 emission. Also is one of the biggest single client groups, not only to construction industry, but to certain other industries, placing them at the forefront for changes and actually having the power to push the industries to develop more sustainable outputs. And here, importantly, it has at disposal an important and very powerful instrument such as public procurement, which could be used as a leverage for sustainability practices, especially when we're looking at the governments and their purchasing power to choose goods and services with reduced environmental impact, in this way contributing to different SDGs. And this instrument is acknowledged by European Commission, which basically tried to propose minimum mandatory green criteria through sectoral legislation or product-specific legislation. And such minimum criteria basically will de facto set a common definition of what means a green purchase. With all being said, let's go and see some key features of this directive. I'll mention just 5 out of all the other provisions, but these are very important. First of all, we have an introduction of a new principle. It's called Energy Efficiency First Principle. This principle and the focus of energy efficiency will be integrated into all national energy and climate plans. And also accountability and different reporting systems are in place. Furthermore, we have an updated target towards member states to achieve a cumulative 11.7% reduction of their energy consumption. And here we have also a lot of monitoring and reporting obligations toward member states, what they need to complete and how they need to report. We have article number 5, which focuses on public sector obligations, and we have a specific 1.9 annual reduction target towards energy efficiency when compared to 2021 baseline. And we have different requirements for public authorities to take action with flexibility until 2027 to choose on which sector they will focus depending on their national context and factors available at the moment. What is important to mention here, there is an article number 6, which set up some obligations toward the exemplary role of public bodies and their buildings. We have a requirement of 3% of annual renovation of public buildings up to nearly zero energy building standard. This annual renovation rate today, it was extended, and it will include different other buildings such as healthcare, education, and public housing. Also, this new recommendation takes into consideration the new standard, which is present in the recast EPBD from the last month. And there are some flexibilities and exceptions, such as national security or public health emergencies. But anyway, we have to achieve this target every year as a mandatory requirement for public authorities. And finally, we have an introduction of a new article specifically focusing on public procurement, article number 7. And here we have a requirement towards prioritization of high energy efficiency performance. And we have an encouragement for public authorities to use green public procurement, which includes other aspects of energy efficiency, such as social and environmental aspects. And moreover, we have an introduction of long-term energy performance contracts, and these contracts basically means that public authorities will ask those who are delivering the products to tie the commodities they deliver to energy performance, and this could be checked if it's according to the state or what they state, how it is performing. This directive works in synergy with some other directives, as I mentioned, with energy performance of a building directive and with public procurement directive. But basically, we have an exemplary role of public authorities towards different activities, such as their buildings, how they perform certain procedures. We have a requirement of, which is very important and missing component today, to create an inventory of not performing or worst performing buildings and create strategies how to prioritize those and renovate them up to this standard. Also, we have a very clear connections with Public Procurement Directive, and now member states will have to publicly share how energy efficiency requirements are considered during their procurement. And of course, with different programs, I just mentioned one here, Repower EU, we have a link which pushes to install more heat pumps and accelerate the rooftop of photovoltaics panels. Despite being quite ambitious, there are some challenges and potential improvements. First of all, one aspect from economic and technological disparities among member states could pose a serious threat and towards achieving these goals. Moreover, we have to balance between independent states and their policies toward more holistic approach of EU in terms of energy efficiency strategies. There are a lot of bureaucratic and administrative complexities, and there are gaps in these terms. Moreover, there are, I think I would say here, there is a lack in monitoring and reporting requirements, which hopefully it will come with some additional guidelines to this directive. But what is striking here, we have a new introduction of this article towards public procurement, and sustainability criteria is an important aspect to be introduced in public procurement. However, article number 7 misses the opportunity to make GPP criteria as a mandatory requirement. The wording used in article number 7 and annex number 4, such as make the best effort or shall wording, basically allows public authorities to continue with business as usual. But the data shows this voluntary approach is not enough. And I will give you an example. The 3% of renovating public buildings was present in the last directive. It was concerning only central authorities buildings. Now it's more broader. However, we can see that big economies, even as Germany and France, we have a decreasing number of buildings being renovated. And basically, or mostly because GPP criteria are on voluntary basis. The second aspect is standards today are becoming more complex, and public authorities basically are left alone in this quest because they don't really understand what this means, how to check them, and without having mandatory criteria or something as a mandatory requirements to follow, they are left alone and basically not knowing what to do in this case. And hopefully the next directive will make the change and make these GPP criteria mandatory as required, because otherwise public authorities will not reach all of these obligations found or required by this directive in special. And with this, I would like to finish. Thank you. And yeah, for questions, let's wait until the end.
Thank you, Alexandru. And we go to the final presentation, Haitham, on the life cycle costing in infrastructure projects.
Can you see my screen? Everything okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So hello everyone. My name is Haitham Ghaida. I am a PhD student at the University of Hasselt in Belgium. Today I will be talking about part of my PhD, which basically it talks about design for disassembly as a strategy for mitigating the environmental impacts of buildings. So my colleagues today presented to you overarching sustainability problems that we face in procurement. But here I would like to present one of the possible solutions, at least for the building sector or for buildings in general, to lower the environmental impacts. My colleague Alexandru just now presented a lot about background information about the issue of environmental sustainability for buildings. Here, I will focus mainly on the environmental impacts arising from the materials required to produce buildings rather than the energy-related impacts. So here I'm going to present this paper that was recently published. I can share the link later on. Feel free to look at it, and you can email me or ask in the chat for any questions. So what we did here is basically we developed a methodology or a framework to basically assess the environmental impacts of buildings where they are designed for disassembly, meaning that the buildings are designed in a way that you could potentially disassemble parts of the building, reuse them, or the whole building, to selectively demolish, let's say, the building, where you can take the windows, the doors, the beams, the columns, and take them to a whole new building project and reuse them. And we wanted to see the environmental benefits of this process. However, we did not find a framework or a methodology to do so. So this is what we did in this paper, is develop this framework. So this framework basically takes a look at, let's say here as an example, we take a look at two basic building assemblies you see in typical houses or buildings. And we take a look at the connections between all the different elements. And then what we do is create basically a disassembly network of the building, or in this case, this wall. And we assess each connection and the potential to disassemble this connection and recover these elements. We took this case, we took this methodology, we applied it on a real case study of a single family house located in the Netherlands. It was built in 2018, and it's a zero energy building. So it should theoretically consume no energy. It should be completely self-sufficient. So in this case, this building, all the environmental impacts are coming from the materials that were required to produce it. So one of the main ways to lower these impacts is through methodologies like design for disassembly or circularity related strategies. We could also look at bio-based materials and so on, but these methodologies were very well developed. So we took a look at a methodology or a circularity strategy that is rarely looked at as a way to mitigate environmental impacts. So we constructed a disassembly network of this case study, and this is basically what it looked like. And we assessed all the connections and the possibilities to disassemble them. And we did a life cycle assessment where we obtained the CO2 impacts of this building. And we compared this building to 3 different variants of the same building, but these variants, the only difference between them were the connections. And so we basically introduced disassembly criteria. So we saw that if we optimize the disassembly potential of connections in this case study, we could potentially reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by up to 45%. Now, in this case, it was a single family house building. So you would, I would say that in other case studies, for example, hospital buildings or public buildings, schools, and so on, we would see even a bigger dip in the impacts, because these buildings have changes that happen a lot. So in office buildings, for example, you can see every 5 years, the whole interior of the building changes. So we need buildings that are easily adaptable, and that will potentially lower the environmental impacts. I just made this a short presentation, so I just wanted to send a message that if you work in a public sector where you deal with a building industry or buildings, I would recommend looking at design for disassembly as a way to reduce the environmental impacts of these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Haitham. Well, first questions or comments from the other moderators, and then we're going to go to the public if there are questions or comments. I will start myself by saying that the common thread of this presentation was that, we're expecting a little bit of more coherence from the European Union institutions in this regard. Everybody's talking about mandatory criteria or pushing for quotas or something like that. So there is a huge expectation that through policy, through mandatory requirements, the sustainability will be brought forward and will be fostered in all these areas. But I don't know what exactly would be the methods for the European Commission to be involved. We are of course discussing about the new directives that will shortly be drafted, because we have already 10 years after the adoption of the last directives, so it's time for the new directives. And the question is whether we should include there, or the European Commission should include there as a proposal, some very hard law for the promotion of sustainability, or do you think that the things are okay as they are? So this is one question for all of you. Roxana?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have some comments.
Yeah.
First of all, congratulations to all the young researchers. I think they have done a wonderful job, and I found their presentations really, really interesting. I wanted to say that I really like Felippe's metaphor as regards the symphony. So I think it's really nice, really suggestive, and it is like that. You have to come about it from so many different angles. And I also liked your point about the 9 sources of sustainability, whether we're talking about legislation and societal push regarding transformational change. Maybe one step further to that affirmation would be the need to adapt which one of these sources will lead in one particular jurisdiction, depending on the structure of that jurisdiction. There are legal environments that are much more prescriptive. Romania tends to be like that. I know Brazil is the same. We have a lot of legislation, legislative inflation, if you want to call it like that. Public officials like to follow very, very detailed rules. So probably in jurisdictions such as this one, a legislative approach would function more than anything else, and you would have to start with that one. But yeah, that's very interesting. And then I also liked Alexandru's point about how energy efficiency can generate jobs. And I think this is also an aspect that has to be exploited. You know that every year there is this United Nations reunion, which is called COP 27, 28, and so forth. The last one was COP 28, and it dedicated an entire day to the construction industry and the built environment. And obviously that's because the construction industry is responsible for 40% of the net zero carbon emissions. And for the first time, there's been a report that presented a business case for net zero carbon approaches in the construction industry, because what contractors are complaining about when it comes to net zero carbon obligations is it costs more money. And contracting authorities already put a lot of pressure on contractors, already want to award contracts based on the lowest bid. So imposing these additional obligations actually makes the entire industry maybe more sustainable environmentally, but less sustainable from an economic perspective. And you also need it to be viable as, from an economic perspective. So that's a very interesting point. And finally, Dacian's point on the legislative approaches, I just wanted to share the UK approach for those who do not know it. Usually the UK is not a very prescriptive legal environment, to the contrary. But in this regard, they really went very into detail with sustainability legislation. First of all, they distinguish between social sustainability and environmental sustainability. They have two different concepts. They tend to use the concept of net zero carbon legislation, net zero target legislation when it comes to environmental sustainability, and social value when it comes to, or improved value when it comes to societal sustainability. And they are the first country to make mandatory including net zero carbon into public documentation, and they've done this in 2011. And they are also amongst the first to do it with social value, because they have the Social Value Act, which is a legislative instrument from 2012 that says that basically all contracting authorities at the local level need to award contracts by taking into consideration at least 10% social value. And then this has extended to other contracting authorities in addition to the local ones with a PPN, procurement policy note, in 2020 that basically says the same thing. So I think legislating, it worked in the UK. It's up to you to say what your point is as regards, the European Commission legislating or not. Thank you for your interesting presentations.
Okay, maybe Sebastien has some points, and then we're going to ask to answer. And we have Felippe, we have a question in the written question. Okay, if Sebastien is okay, Sebastien is there. Okay.
My only question for anyone here would be how can standards help public procurers in procuring more sustainably? How can they be used to their advantage? Suppose based on Haitham's method, this can be turned into an actual standard. How would this help them, and how would the process look like? Should this, well, obviously it hasn't happened yet, but how would the process from a legal point of view look like to make this happen? What do we need to do to encourage this change as a SAPIENS consortium? Thank you.
Okay. Would you like to answer?
Can I?
Yes,
Dacian?
please.
Great. Thank you for the comments, Dacian, Roxana, and Sebastien. I have made some notes here quickly. I really like Dacian's provoking quote, such as, should the EU go further? And I might say, maybe you should look to all the huge organizational countries in terms of India, Brazil, etc., which work such as a huge space of political debates, etc., because they are developing mandatory requirements. They are developing more data, procurement data relation, etc. Sometimes the EU are too much focusing on inside, on even EU and US, and they don't look further. I think this is something that they could eventually go for and learn from other countries' experiences in those terms. Also really enjoyed Roxana's reflection on maybe the disciplinary approaches may change considering the country context, and I absolutely agree on that. Some countries have much more law enforcement than others, and I really think that this is a further research topic that we should go for it, to understand how each country does this comparative approach to sustainable public procurement. And regarding Sebastian's comments, it's interesting because talking about standards, in my research topic at least, we have found that standards are an important driver for implementing sustainable public procurement. Several practitioners were saying that when we have standards, we are more confident because we can share the responsibility of using the standards, etc. Although, when looking to the collaboration side, the standards organization, they are usually stated as a potential collaborator. They are not interacting yet, maybe. At least in our research context, we didn't find interactions between contracting authorities, even huge contracting authorities. They're not interacting with the standard organization, so these still look at different worlds, and they are not. We should eventually force them to interact more and share more on that. And just a small comment on the really nice question we have on chat from Yaura Farca. She made two questions on collaborations and involvement of stakeholders. I really like to thank you for that.
Yeah, maybe you can read the questions for those who are only listening. So
sure. She said, Felippe, you mentioned the involvement of stakeholders. In your opinion, what will be a concrete way stakeholders could express their point of view on sustainability of the sustainability of an award procedure? And she asked if I had an examples from comparative law, and she made a really good comment that stakeholders should be involved in the earlier stages of the award procedure, even before the start of the award procedure. And in that point, I definitely agree. In my research, we have even some submitted papers on this topic, because there are several ways on how to do collaboration. And I can give some examples that we got it from the data, such as there are benchmarking where public buyers are talking with private buyers, and they can share the understanding of sustainability to improve the process, even before the procurement planning, supplier selection, even when they are deciding which are understanding their own needs and defining the strategy for buying or not to buy, etc. They can do that. There are also research-based dialogues. There are being joint efforts between academia and public buyers when they are assessing the market landscape and going towards the potential suppliers and industry organizations, trying to understand the availability of the sustainable products and services before the procurement planning. We're talking here really defining what we need as a public authority, what we want to buy or not. So there are several ways, and we are discussing that on a paper, several ways of doing interaction between stakeholders before and obviously during the definition of the procurement specifications and criteria, during the supplier selection, and during contract management too. We have different ways of doing that. We are a total of 27 ways of doing 14 ways of doing procurement interactions within procurement process regarding sustainability issues. So it's really interesting. And I cannot say that I have examples on comparative law because I'm not a lawyer researcher, but I can tell you that in my research, we are comparing completely different contexts, such as Brazil and Sweden. They have completely different law regulations and bureaucratic contexts. And in our research, we have been finding that maybe collaboration is not defined by the context, not defined by the law, etc., but mostly by individual commitment and organizational capacity to understand those laws and apply them in a different way. So even with different contexts, we are having experiences on collaboration. So I think this might have some impact on further studies on that topic. And thank you for the opportunity to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. Haitham, Alexandru, Nadia.
Yeah, I may add something if I may. To your question, Dacian, I don't think today at you. Yeah, I don't think today at EU level we have a lack of legislation. We may have lack of enforcement and understanding what we have to do, and that's the biggest problem, because the cycle of updating directives was once in 10 years, but we can see that different directives already try to do this every 4 or 5 years, and it's not minor improvements. We are changing completely the settings. At least in construction industry, we see a very broad change of standards and approaches we use, and market actually cannot keep the pace of this change, and it doesn't have time to adopt. And this is also valid for public authorities, because they don't have an understanding what they have to do. There are a lot of obligations, and if we are looking at country-specific legislation, we already have fines for not complying with something. But they are not enforced enough because we don't know how to do it. And in talk with different public authorities at local level, we can understand why, because many reasons. We don't have the capacity, we don't have enough money. We put a lot of pressure on the industry to deliver on the lowest price, but they have to deliver tenfold more than was a few years ago. And actually, the report from European audit, which came like 2 months ago, actually shows us that we have low participations of companies into public tenders because something is happening and no one wants to go deeper in that. What is needed, I think, today is basically to look at local factors and help local authorities at local level to adopt whatever we have in our legislation to local settings, to do a more collaborative approach, to discuss with the market, try to understand their needs and how to prepare it. And if there is a lack of workforce, then we have to see how we can adapt this green public procurement criteria to our local settings by putting these requirements, not something that is valid for all the Europe. This is one aspect. The second one, Europe is not an equal continent, and different countries do have different economic prosperity, but also we are living in 5 different climate zones. And from my perspective as a construction industry expert, I can say building in Italy is not the same as building in Finland. There are completely different standards and requirements should be different. And again, approaches should be different. Therefore, enforcement is one thing and understanding of this concept is another one. And we have to push there, I think, more.
Okay, great. So more enforcement and not necessarily more legislation.
True.
Okay.
If I may add something from my perspective related to your question, Dacian, and also to Sebastian's questions, I feel like both of them refer to this continuous debate that we have in sustainable public procurement between voluntary and mandatory. And I will speak from my perspective, that of sustainable public procurement data collection. And as I explained in my presentation, we do have a standard, which is the e-forms, to collect data, but it is limited by the fact that all of the sustainability fields are optional. So member states can decide to collect or not this data. And I believe we should have mandatory criteria, mandatory fields, but this should be done in the directive. More specifically in Annex 5 of the directive, which sets the information that has to be present in the contract notices and contract award notices that are published in TED. So in my case, in this particular case of data collection, I believe mandatory fields would bring a positive impact.
Thank you, Nadia. Very good points. Haitham? Can you see your model as being standardized for the whole Europe?
Yeah, I think it's coming. It's on the way. I think ISO just released its circularity standards recently. There is the technical committee 350 from ISO, from the European norms. They're also working to develop the circularity assessment standards for the building sector. And I think these will quickly find their way into legislation because it's already mandated by the EU, I think by year 2027, that all buildings, regardless of where they are in the EU, need to report on their environmental impacts. Countries need to set their targets and set their reduction pathways. So it is coming. So for the building sector, at least, the legislation is moving very fast in terms of standardizing the environmental impact calculation and so on.
Okay, thank you.
I think Alexandru would know more about these specific directives. So you have something to add there, Alexandru? Feel free.
No, I think you made the point. These standards are coming, and we see a lot of changes today, because just last month we have a new recast of EPBD and brings again new standards, new requirements, and a lot of following up, the things which member states will have to take into consideration. And these standards, as you said in ISO, there is a development in circularity domain. A lot of standards will come and will have to report accordingly. Again, the market will have to take it and somehow prepare it. I have no idea how this will happen, but yes, these are new changes that definitely your work is welcome here.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the attendants and the people attending? Hopefully it was informative for all of you, this workshop and these presentations. I will have a few more minutes at our disposal. I will raise, if there are no other questions, I will raise a final idea to discuss together here. Whether well, you all are saying that the public procurers or the public authorities do not have the capacity yet to deal with all these challenges in terms of sustainability and to bring sustainability to the table by themselves. So that's why on one part the need for quotas or for hard measures to impose sustainability. On the other side, the need for education and for training for the public officials in areas such as construction, procurement, or LCC, using the LCC in infrastructure projects, or cooperating or collaborating with other actors and not being afraid maybe to ask for the consultancy at the beginning of the initiation of the public procurement process, and taking care of the principles of proportionality, equal treatment, and so on during the process, while using the consultancy to develop the technical specifications and everything. So for all that, we are experiencing, and this is not something new, maybe in the private world or in the private sphere, there are more capabilities than in the public sphere. And maybe it will be the same for a long time. It will not change, because maybe even experts in the public field are migrating to the private world and being paid handsomely when they have the knowledge to do so. So are we still talking in this context about public procurement, or it's a privatized procurement? And this interplay between how much to accept from a consultant as help during the public procurement process should be the main preoccupation for public authorities now. Because in my mind, that's one issue to deal with. And of course, we have the principles, we have the law, European law, saying how to deal with the with this, but it's a constant struggle to keep, the decision within the public law sphere, within the public domain, and decide there. It seems that sometimes the private market is dictating how the public procurement is run. Or maybe I'm wrong. Okay, what do you think? And is this democratic, in the end?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, Dacian. Thank you so much. Really, I agree when you're bringing this discussion to, let's not only look to the public procurement and public organization and public administration side. We need to look towards the supplier side, the market, the civil society, etc. I mean, this is not only a public management process. Public procurement does not involve only public administration, but several stakeholders outside. And we really need to think, is public procurement buying what the market had already decided to sell? Or is public procurement trying to buy something that the market still don't have it available? They are pushing the market forward. This relationship between public and private in the beginning is not well addressed, I think. Now the public procurement has become a main public policy related to sustainability. There's a huge power that we need to use. Okay, but how are we connected with the private market? I mean, are we still enemies because the market can be corrupting someone inside the government, or are still doing this together, looking for a good decision? And when we need to discuss this thing of bringing experts from the private world to the public world, helping to specify, for example, a sustainable solution. How can the public organization lock it in an office building at the highest floor in the capital, just have a brilliant idea on how things can happen in the real world without talking with the private companies, without consultancy companies, etc. So in that sense, I think that yes, there must be the symbiosis between the different actors. But I also agree that there are some risks on doing that, especially when we're talking about, for example, we have found that in our research, developing supplier dependency. The public procurement, public contracting authority can be completely dependent of one supplier just by asking them to help to build some specifications, etc. And then 10 years later, you just have running your entire market. You are just relying on one supplier that can bring you the information. You have sometimes developing some bias because you have limited stakeholder participation. Oh, I'm just invited one consultancy company to help me, and you're not inviting the other ones. And what's going on here? I mean, you're doing privileges. We're having a limited vision of everything. And mainly, we have the accountability erosion. I think that Dacian touches on this point brilliantly. Who is deciding what this public organization is buying? Who is deciding which services that school is providing to the children? It's the public authority which has the let's say the Hobbesian legitimacy, etc. The huge body, or is the private company from that place that is deciding what the child is going to have or not? So we need to make those things really, really clear. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, on the collaboration side. How can we make these things as transparent enough, or we can eventually say who is accountable or not for this kind of decision? So really, really interesting point.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
Yes, just a small remark here. I completely agree with Felippe, and actually the question is very interesting because it raises a lot of questions. But I think we are stepping now in uncharted territory because we know that we want to achieve climate neutrality, but we don't know yet how. And a possible solution for this is to have innovative solutions which require out-box thinking. And I don't think today public authorities and their capabilities are able to do so without the help of private sector, without trying to innovate and buying something, but we don't know yet how it looks. and without actually the help of private sector, which is part of the economy and part of the sustainable development, will not do it properly. Therefore, now I don't know how to balance, but I know for sure that if our priority is to obtain sustainability, then we have to make the best effort to obtain the best value for money we spend. Of course, with the respect of principles found in the Public Procurement Directive of transparency, accountability, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? Haitham or Nadia?
Yes, if I may add just a quick thought. I think that in the case of technology and the public sector, we need to be extra careful because the interests are quite different when it comes to the private sector and the idea of making profit for the shareholders, and the public sector where the main interest is the society. So therefore, when we are adopting new technologies, we should be more careful than the private sector, because this can have a lot of impact on society. And just to give one example, we have the study on the uptake of emerging technologies published by the European Commission and drafted by Deloitte, where we have many, many examples of trying to use emerging technologies in the public sector. And we should look at the follow-up of this, and we should look if these experiments were actually useful and carried out throughout the years, or were they just an experiment for a few months, or not even carried out, that used the public money and maybe wasted public money. So this is a question that we should be asking ourselves. But on the other hand, we have a lot of positive examples of collaboration with other stakeholders. As I mentioned, the Open Contracting Partnership, for example, that has worked with different governments in helping them have better data on sustainable public procurement.
Okay, thank you. Haitham, if you want to say something.
I have nothing more because we're also 3 minutes on top of over the limit. So, yeah.
Okay, so this was our workshop. Thank you very much for your presentation and your contributions. Thank you for Sebastien for joining us from Hasselt as co-moderator, and to all participants. You all can contact our researchers for further questions or cooperation. Of course, keep in touch with this project that will deliver a lot of sustainable public procurement, at least theoretically. Then we should see how we can implement this in practice. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.